Hi everyone, it's Sam from Massive Supply Co. I've just released version 1.1.0 of DYSPLACE. I wanted to make a quick video highlighting all of the changes in this version. I'll go into detail on some new functionalities that have been added, but there are two things that I'm not going to go in depth on. The first big change with this version of DYSPLACE is that map load times have been decreased. Anytime you hit the load button now, the displacement maps in DYSPLACE will load much faster than before. Ultimately, the goal is for this process to be instant, but unfortunately, Photoshop can be a little bit slow with the way that it handles thumbnails. In the future, the goal is for this to take no time at all, for this to be an instant process when DYSPLACE is loaded, but as for right now, I'm happy to say that the displacement map load speed is much quicker. I've also improved DYSPLACE's functionality on Windows. If you're a Windows user, like I said, I'm not going to go super into detail on this, but DYSPLACE should work much better on your system. If you're a Windows user, you may have been having issues with things like the Create New Map button or with placing maps as layers under the right-click menu. This is due to the way that Windows handles files in comparison to how Macs handle files. All of these things have been updated, so if you are a Windows user, I definitely recommend that you update to this new version of DYSPLACE. One new feature of DYSPLACE in this version is the Update Thumbnail button. This one's a little bit hidden as it's within the right-click menu, but if you right-click on a displacement map and click Update Thumbnail, just the thumbnail of that selected displacement map will be updated. I know sometimes users go in and they make changes to a displacement map, and then those changes aren't reflected in the thumbnail as it isn't updated automatically. This Update Thumbnail button hopes to resolve that. As you can see, I've opened Bubbles 1, I've added a new layer to it, and then I've saved the document. Going back, right-clicking and selecting Update Thumbnail has updated it to reflect the changes. I can go back in, I can delete my layer with the white brush that I made, and repeat the process. If I click Update Thumbnail, then the changes will be reflected. Upon installing this new version of DYSPLACE, there are three new buttons that are a little more obvious. First off, there's the Anchor button, Favorites button, and then the Folder button. I'm going to talk about these from right to left because I'm going to spend the most amount of time talking about the Anchor button. So let's get started talking about the Folder button. The Folder button is pretty simple. Click this and it'll bring up a prompt asking you if you want to open a folder. Clicking Allow will open the Images folder within DYSPLACE's plugin folder. If you click Remember My Choice before clicking Allow, this prompt won't be brought up again. If you want to give DYSPLACE permission to always access this folder, you can go ahead and click Remember My Choice and then click Allow, and this prompt won't be brought up in the future. The Images folder is what holds all of the displacement maps that DYSPLACE uses. Sometimes this folder can be a little buried in your files, so I thought that including the Folder button would make it much easier to access and add in new maps anytime you want. Instead of having to hunt through your file explorer on your computer, click this and you can go straight there. Up next is the Favorites button. DYSPLACE now has a favoriting system. What you'll notice is that when you open your displacement map section, each of these maps now has a little star icon. Clicking on the star icon on a map will mark it as a favorite. This will be remembered anytime that you close DYSPLACE, reopen DYSPLACE, quit out of Photoshop, it'll always be remembered. Clicking on the Favorites button will toggle whether you're seeing all displacement maps or just your favorited ones. I'm hoping that adding this favoriting system will make it easier to keep track of which maps you use the most. The last new feature of DYSPLACE is Anchor Mode, which you can activate by clicking on the Anchor button. I'm going to take a little bit of time to explain this so that you can understand exactly how it works. As you can see, I'm currently displacing the layer on the left using DYSPLACE's default displacement mode. If you've used DYSPLACE before, this is what you're used to seeing. As I apply vertical displacement, my layer is moving up and down and is being distorted throughout my document. Why does this happen? So the way displacement works is that for every pixel of displacement that is applied, your layer is going to be shifted that amount depending on what lightness value is present in your displacement map. I know that's a little bit complicated, but understand it this way. If you applied a 100 pixel vertical displacement to your layer and your displacement map was entirely black, your layer would be shifted 100 pixels downwards. If your displacement map was entirely white, your layer would be shifted 100 pixels upwards. And if your displacement map was a perfect 50% gray, your layer will not shift at all. Essentially, this is how displacement works. Because we're working with displacement maps that have multiple black, white, and gray values, that is what produces displacement, that's what produces distortion in our layers. Now this is where Anchor Mode comes in. Because the majority of displacement maps that I provide you with DYSPLACE have a black background, I've created Anchor Mode as a way to tell Photoshop to try to keep your layer in place. Basically, the way Anchor Mode is going to work is that your layer is going to be transformed a negative amount of pixels that you are applying. Basically, if you're applying a 100 pixel vertical displacement, your layer will be transformed negative 100 pixels, that means 100 pixels upwards in this case, and then the displacement effect will take place. Essentially what this is going to do is trick Photoshop into keeping your layer in the exact same place when working with a displacement map that has a black background. It will appear as if the black values are not being displaced and only lighter values of your displacement are taking effect. I have displaced both of these layers side by side so that you can see the difference, and I've used the same displacement map as well. As you can see, the one that is displaced using the default displacement mode has been shifted downwards. You can see it's getting distorted through some of those lighter values as it's moved down, whereas this layer that we've displaced using anchor mode has generally stayed in the same place. Even though we've displaced it 200 pixels downwards, because it's sitting on that black spot of the background, the layer hasn't really moved. I'm going to enable anchor mode and start displacing this layer again while the displacement map is applied to my document so that you can get a better idea of what's happening. You can see how the layer is essentially fighting against Photoshop to stay in the same place in the canvas. When I switch back to this one in default mode, it slides all over, but the one that we displace using anchor mode has stayed in the same place. Hopefully that gives you an idea of how anchor mode works. Essentially, your layer is just going to move a negative amount of pixels as you see shown on the Displace plugin panel. If it says 100 on horizontal displacement, that means you're going to move negative 100 pixels or 100 pixels to the left, and then the displacement effect will take place. If it says negative 100 on horizontal displacement, that means you're going to move positive 100 pixels. That means 100 pixels to the right, and then the displacement effect will take place. What this means for you is that you shouldn't really use anchor mode unless you're working with a displacement map with a black background. The only other thing you really need to know about anchor mode is that it will only stay applied as long as you're selecting a single layer. What you'll notice is that as soon as I select a different tool, click on a different layer, anything like that, anchor mode will be disabled. So as long as you're selecting one single layer and you have anchor mode on, it will stay on. As soon as you decide to do something else in Photoshop, Displace will automatically shut anchor mode off. The way displacement works in Photoshop can be a little bit confusing. I'm hoping that I explained anchor mode well enough. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, feel free to send me a message on Instagram. You can feel free to leave a comment on here. I'm more likely to see something if you get me on email or Instagram, but I'll try to keep up with comments on here as best as I can. If you're facing any other bugs with this plugin, definitely reach out to me and I'll be happy to help you with resolving them. If you have any ideas for features or new things you'd like to see implemented in Displace, you can also contact me. Hopefully this was all helpful. If you're watching it and you already own Displace, thank you for purchasing it. I really appreciate it. If you're thinking about purchasing Displace and you haven't yet, you can find a link to it in the description. Thank you.